Okay, well, it's 12 noon, and to honor everyone's time, I think we'll get started. So welcome everyone to Running for the School Board Essential Tips for Candidates, an ISB webinar. If at any point you experience any audio troubles and you're listening through your computer speakers, you can call into the webinar through your telephone. Just open up the chat window in your pane and dial the phone number listed there. And I'm going to put that into the chat window now, and I'll post it in a minute or so for folks who may come later. But this is an important part, don't you think, Harry, of
Absolutely.
our webinar. We really want to make this a better learning experience for all and want your engagement. So please submit your questions. All you have to do is open up the Q&A window and submit your questions anytime. I'll be watching those and feeding them to our presenters, and we'll respond to your questions throughout the session. Now to get us started, my name is Luann Gavist, and I'm on the board development team here at IASB. I'll be facilitating today's conversation with our three panelists who will be sharing their expertise and insights with you today. And Harry, my colleague, let's get it started off with you. You can introduce yourself and the other panelists.
Great, thanks, Luann. So I'm Harry Heiligenthal. I've had the pleasure of being on staff in board development for the last 19 years. Yes, I'm as old as I look. Over those 19 years, I probably average around 60 or 70 board meetings and workshops per year that I interact with. So I bring that experience to this, as well as a former teacher and middle school and elementary principal in my earlier days. So Amy, tell us about yourself, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Jurens. I'm the past president of the IASB Board of Directors, and I served on the George Little Rock School Board in Northwest Iowa for 16 years, and 4 of those were as president.
Great, and Greg?
I'm Greg Hetrick. I'm the vice president of the board for West Branch Community School District. I've been on the board now for just at 2 years, so I'm fairly new to this.
And between Greg and Amy's perspectives, that'll be really healthy hearing from you with beginning level and many years experience. You'll notice throughout to our participants throughout today's webinar, we have several polls where we'll be asking you to weigh in. And let's look to the first one. Luann, if you'd launch that poll, and let's find out who's online with us today, please.
You bet. I'm going to launch the poll now. You all should see it. Unless you have a web filter, you may not see the poll. That's something you can address later, but most people should. And go ahead and read through the questions and vote which one best represents who you are.
Great. This is an advanced group. The bar graph was moving before you and I were even finished speaking.
Yeah.
Good to see. Cool. We'll leave that open for a few more seconds. And you can see delighted. We in particular, we were aiming this session at those who are both just thinking about, considering, or maybe already have decided to run for the board, as well as other community members who want to learn and current board members. So you guys can see results of the poll. Thanks everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Perfect.
Now, and I'll let you, for those who may not see the poll, Harry, I'll let you describe what
Right.
you see.
Sounds good. So about 80% of you are either a new candidate who has decided to run for the board, or you're thinking about running for the board. And that's great, as well as those who are a current board member or just not running but listening. So with that, let's take a look at if you close the poll, please.
I will, and Harry, now that I made you co-host, you'll have to close it on your screen too.
All righty. And to our participants, if there's somebody who might have a little rough wave or spot in the technology, it probably will be me. So bear with us. Here are the areas we're going to touch on today. And by the way, we formed or shaped today's webinar based on input from about 20 or 25 board members who were elected 2 years ago, like Greg, as well as a cross-section of superintendents from across the state. And you can see the 6 areas that we're going to touch on first. I'll give you a minute to skim those. And by the way, authority of the board, role of the board were the items mentioned most frequently. So with that, the format for today's session is we're going to, I'll share a little bit of content, and then Amy, Greg will weigh in with insights, and we'll just kind of repeat that cycle. when I can get this to advance. I'm hung up, Luann.
So just click on the PowerPoint.
Mhm.
There you go.
All righty. So the first area, authority of the board. A couple of things that, and it may seem like real foundational, but again, board members and across the state say this is such a critical thing, that the board works as a whole at the board table. And in translation, you really don't have any authority as an individual board member, and the courts have been pretty clear about that. It's as a whole. The other thing is, important thing is that deliberations and decision-making by law are to be done in the view of the public. And there's a few cases where the board can go into a closed or an exempt session, but those are the rarities. And most work by board by law is done in the open. You contrast that if you look at some other things. There are often misperceptions about the board's authority, including candidates making promises ahead of time. I'm going to do X, I'm going to do Y. And it's so important to remember, again, authority of the board rests with the body as a whole. So no matter how loud an individual speaks, sorry, but the reality is they have no authority as an individual. And I want to probe a little bit more into this area of the authority of the board as a whole, and why we encourage or caution board members about making promises and encourage them not to. Three ideas here. For most board members, there is a ton of new information to learn. And so we encourage candidates, give yourself a chance to learn before you get to those board votes, remembering you don't have authority as an entity of one. It's as a body, and you are only one vote. So with that in mind, Greg and Amy, would you guys, Amy first, just describe some insights and advice you have about key things to keep in mind when it comes to the authority of the board? Amy?
Thanks, Harry. One thing that I learned early on, as a parent, I'm really concerned about my child's educational experiences, but when you sit on the board, your role at the board table is to think about all the students in the district, not just your own child. So that was one piece of advice that I got early on, and that helped me a lot. And Harry was talking about how the public has misperceptions about the board. They often think that the board manages the school district, when really it's the superintendent who manages the school district. Principals manage teachers and students. So understanding that there's kind of that chain of command. Many times community members think that by taking a concern to an individual board member, that board member has authority to go in and do something about their issue. Maybe a parent has a dispute about a teacher, and so they go to the board member and they want the board member to intervene on their behalf. And that's just a pitfall you'll want to avoid. And I think Greg will talk about why that is. Just know that you have your role in the chain of command.
Such an important point, Amy, you made about you're elected on behalf or to represent all students in your district, not just your own or your friends or your neighbors. So thanks for sharing that. Greg, your insights about authority of the board.
Yeah, probably one of the biggest things that you learn once you're seated on a board is that there was a lot of work that was done before you got there by previous boards, by previous superintendents maybe, to get to a point where you're at. So if you start to make promises without fully understanding how the district got to the point that they're at, then you may learn a lot of things once you get there that maybe invalidate your promise, that change your mind and how things work. And then again, you just can't reiterate enough that as a single board member, you're one of 5 or one of 7, and so you need 3 or 4 total board members to do anything. And so other people may have different opinions, so you're really limited in what you can do. You have to act as a body.
Good, thanks, Greg. Luann, if you'd open the next poll, we're going to ask participants to weigh in, and this question is really aimed at candidates and or those thinking about running for the board and current board members. So yes or no, have you already been asked to promise how you would vote on a specific issue or topic?
And just to mention that these polls are anonymous, so we don't know how people answer. I mean, we see the overall results, but we don't know individual. So
Translation, you're protecting their anonymity from me. I can't screw anything up. Go ahead. Let's go ahead and close the poll.
Okay,
then.
let's see. It looks like almost everybody voted. So
Yeah.
let's share the results.
Cool. I'm encouraged to see that. Sometimes candidates or newly elected board members will say, yep, I've already been cornered and asked to promise on something, and many of you haven't. So,
And for those that may not see the poll, do you want to tell what the results were?
you
Okay.
bet. Thank you. Being my conscience here. Yeah, 90% of you said you had not been asked to make a promise on something yet, and 10% had. So,
Okay,
all right.
let's go
I
back.
need to close the poll, don't I?
Yes.
All
Well
right.
done, Harry. You did it.
Yeah, how about that? I'm up for the Tech of the Year award, I think, or something like that. All right, let's move to the next area, learning about the role of the board. And again, this is one of the two most frequently mentioned areas by folks who were elected 2 years ago. And so you'll hear language like this, the importance of maintaining the big picture view as a board, what we would refer to as the governance level versus getting lost in the weeds and way down the day-to-day operations, which are really aimed at and intended for superintendent, his or her staff, and staff members to address those day-to-day issues. And a couple other items that are at play. So we've got the governance versus the management role. And then another one is, if you think about this for a minute, the board superintendent as a group is referred to as the governance team. Well, and yet the board and superintendent have very distinct responsibilities. So how can a board and superintendent navigate that governance role while still having very different duties? For example, the superintendent has no vote. It's just board members. But by the same token, the board depends and counts on the superintendent to provide information, do research, and prepare recommendations to bring to the board. So you get a constant flow of information that the board then uses to make governance level decisions. And then the other piece would be just, again, much like there are a lot of common misperceptions around the authority of the board, there are also misperceptions around the role of the board. And when Amy and Greg spoke in the previous section about community members, parents may come to a board member with concerns, the board's formal involvement is not the first step, but rather in the process, if concerns are not resolved, eventually it will find its way or bump up to the level of the board, but that's not the first place. So with that in mind, would ask Greg, would you start on this section and share some of your insights and your advice and tips around role of the board, please?
Sure. As a board member, and especially as a new board member, I think I had been elected to the board, and then maybe before 11 p.m. the night that the polls closed, I had parents reaching out to me about individual concerns. So you'll get hit right away, and you need to understand that a lot of those things the board really has very minimal involvement in. Things like student discipline issues, things like teacher discipline issues. Those, just by law, the board is designed to stay completely out of because we have to be a neutral arbitrator. You know, should a student issue go to expulsion, that comes to the board to really look at the facts of the case, just like a jury would, and make a determination of whether that's the best way to proceed. Same with teacher discipline issues. So the big reason we stay out of those is so we can remain unbiased, right? So if you're, communicating or handling things on a student discipline issue or on a teacher issue, then you kind of lose some of that bias. It kind of goes also to some of those promises you make, right? So if you go out and promise that, yeah, I'm going to take care of this problem, and it's something that the board doesn't really handle, then you can kind of put yourself in a bad situation.
Absolutely, Greg. I also would just add in that you also unintentionally may be shortchanging the teacher, the coach, the principal from the opportunity to actually help resolve the issue. And you're wanting to reinforce and provide the opportunity for staff and parents or community to resolve issues.
Yep, absolutely. Other things that are a little different. So when you're on the board, there's the role of the board president, which has a little different role. They have a little different area of communication with the superintendent. So in situations of staff or student discipline issues, the board president will know about that, and the rest of the board's kind of not allowed to know. You'll see in a lot of your board policies that, if a student's suspended for longer than X number of days, then the board president's notified of that. And you just have to understand that there's things that board president is going to know that you're not too, and that's, again, to kind of remain unbiased should it go any further. The big kind of thing that I think about with role of the board versus role of like a superintendent. So a lot of times you'll hear we're at the 30,000 foot level. So the kind of example I think of is, we may state that as a direction, we want the district to, implement more technology into the classroom, right? We want, students to have a better experience between education and technology. It's up to the superintendent to actually implement that in a way that they feel is good for the district and the students. And then on the backside of that, it's up for us as a board to come back maybe a year or two later and make sure that those goals that we wanted are being met, or that it's being met in a way that we want them to be improving student learning, those sorts of things. So just kind of that level, that the superintendent really is the one in the weeds, like Harry had mentioned, and we stay, kind of up high, driving a big ship, so to speak.
Your technology example is really a good one, Greg, setting that big picture direction, and then superintendent and his or her staff figuring out how do we get there and the specifics on that. Amy, what thoughts do you have or insights about the role of the board?
Well, I just want to piggyback off what Greg was saying about how the superintendent is the one who really carries it out. And that works really well when the board and the superintendent have a great relationship. And it's our responsibility as board members to really put ourselves out there to build a relationship with the superintendent so that we understand the direction that superintendent is steering us. And as a board, then we can hold that superintendent accountable for making sure that we're meeting those goals and those outcomes that we wanted to, kind of like Greg was talking about with the technology. It is natural to want to help patrons. People come to you, they're upset, they're concerned, they want resolution, and you feel for them. But it's important to remember that as board members, we're not the solution. As Harry had mentioned, if you try to solve the problem, you keep the teacher or the coach or the principal, the person closest to the issue, you rob them of a chance to solve it in a way that is positive for everyone involved. So you don't want to rob people of the chance to do their job by stepping in as a board member. So, and again, we don't know the details of situations. We don't know all of the factors. And so it's important to just, listen to patrons, because they will want to talk to you, and then direct them toward a solution instead of being the solution.
You bet. And in this day of social media where something can happen and kids may be already texting family members, friends, parents or community may hear about something before somebody on staff, or certainly before board members or the administration hears about it. And so that becomes an extra layer of challenge. So Lou, if you launch the next poll,
Sure.
We thought we would ask our participants to share their reflection. Which of these four statements do you believe reflects the community members in your area, their general understanding about the role of the board?
So some of these statements are a little bit longer, so just giving folks a little bit of time to read and think about their situation. And while they're doing that, I was thinking to Amy and Greg and Harry that not only are you robbing the person if you try to solve the problem yourself, you're also undermining the trust, aren't you, amongst the board team and the administration.
Yeah, we could use an example of two. If Greg and Amy were on the same board, and Greg, well-intentioned, is jumping in to intervene every time somebody calls him starting at 11 o'clock the night you were elected. And Amy's trying to guide community members and patrons to go close to the source to resolve it. I mean, it creates an awkwardness between Greg, Amy, and the rest of the board members. And then sometimes the board member will say, well, I don't understand why I'm getting all these calls. Well, it may be because, well-intentioned as you may be, that you are inserting yourself into it and shortchanging the chance for staff to look at that. So, all right, let's go ahead and quote. Wait, Greg, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and to that point, the biggest issue you'll probably run into is the amount of time that if you become known as the board person that will like hand carry around everything, your time commitment will go through the roof. And that's what you pay the superintendent to do, and principals and teachers, not.
And it will be pretty inefficient use of your time, because any information seeking you're going to do are going to be similar steps that the superintendent, the principal, or whomever that's closer to it would be doing as well. So polls closed.
Yep.
Good. For encouraging to see about almost 3/4 of you are either acknowledge that this is something I'm learning. I don't know where our community stands at fourth choice, or few members understand. And again, part of why it's in this webinar included is what we hear from new board members after every election. And what we hear from veteran board members is we've got work to do to help our community better understand what big picture governance level leadership looks like. So, and Lou, I'm actually remembering anymore to click on the slide when we're ready to move on. Yeah. So another area, and again, all these areas, if you are elected for the board, you'll have learning opportunities we're going to be talking about later within your district, and that our association provides to go much deeper into these various areas. We're just scratching the surface today. So understanding district finances. Boy, if there's one thing that I would hope you would just commit to memory, is enrollment is going to be the biggest influencer and heavy hitter on what are the trends in your district's finances. And that's such a critical piece. So for districts whose enrollment has been pretty flat or even declining, they encounter and face some pretty stiff challenges in being able to remain a functioning district. And they're likely to bump into what feels like reoccurring needs to cut and reallocate within the budget. The other three areas, school finance, we refer to it as silos or separate pots of money. There's a general fund, which is a big part of a district's budget, where there's a lot of latitude, but not complete latitude. And then there are funds that can only be used for bricks and mortar projects, et cetera. And Greg and Amy will share a little bit more about that. The last 2 points, the fiscal year for a school district is July 1 to June 30th. So it does not align with the calendar year. And I think the bottom one is such a critical piece that it's going to take a while to learn school finance. There's support through our association, through your district, your superintendent and business official. You just want to be persistent and continue to realize and remind yourself, I'm not alone as I learn school finance. Click on the slide here again. Good. Amy, would you share some thoughts and tips and insights about school finance?
Well, as someone who's not strong in finances, that's not my background. I'm an English professor. This was a challenge for me. I would recommend, since we're early in the game, see if you can go to, your August, September, October board meetings, so you can just see what the board packet looks like and the financial statements. But beyond that, you can call the business manager or the superintendent and just ask them to sit with you and explain some of those high level, the basics, and show you how that looks in the district that you're running for, how enrollment is impacting the budget and that sort of thing. Once you're seated on the board, you have lots of support from the School Board Association. They will send out people to meet with your board superintendent team and go into some details about your board's finances, your district's finances, and you can get education sessions at our annual convention. Please take advantage of those. They are helpful.
You'll hear us more than once talk about November 20, November 21. More on that later. Greg, your thoughts and insights around school finances.
Sure. School finance is probably the one thing that I was most in the dark about when I started. It's the one thing that most people I talk with outside of the school are most in the dark. about how it all works, right? You'll immediately get the questions of, why are we building this building when we just lost, 30 students and have to lay off a teacher, right? Those things you'll learn as you go through it. When Harry was talking about separate pots of money, I also like to point out that there's not just separate silos of money, but some of those silos have silos within them for specific use cases that it gets even more confusing. I've talked to our business secretary frequently. If I see something come up, if ISB sends out, they send out information throughout the year about all kinds of things, and I'll say, hey, clarify this for me. You're going to have to ask a lot of questions at the board table. Amy mentioned go to your October board meeting or September, now that we have some time before the November elections. The October one is by far probably one of the most important, because that's when enrollment numbers are due. The first part of October, so they'll probably be talking about what your district's enrollment numbers are. I remember the first October meeting I went to, I had to step out for a second, and I came back in, and they were presenting the numbers, and I looked at the numbers and said, how do you get 0.4 of a person? Because your enrollment was like 780.4. Everybody kind of chuckled and said, welcome to school finance. And so you'll have to kind of understand how that all works. It will take at least a year to get through it, because there's certain things throughout the year that come up that are only yearly expenditures or yearly instances, and you'll ask those questions. So it's a long learning cycle, and I can't reiterate again, like Amy had mentioned, there's sessions, workshops at the annual convention that helped me out tremendously, and at least getting background and then getting as much information as I could.
One of the examples you mentioned, Greg, if you just, my heart aches when new board members are first on the board, and before they know it, it's winter and next spring and setting budget. And as you said, if I'm in a district where enrollment's been flat or decreasing a little bit, and so we have to cut 1.5 staff members. By the same token, our science wing, was built in the 50s and is in major need of a facelift for safety, for quality instruction. And the typical community member may be frustrated or angry and just says, to heck with the science wing, that can wait another year, save the 2 or the 1.5 staff members. And the reality is they're paid out of different pots of money. And so you couldn't use the money that's allocated for bricks and mortar if you wanted to for staff. And so, and again, there will be many more opportunities for new board members to learn their way into this. Lou is signaling us. So Lou, do we have a question?
We do. We have a question from one of our attendees. The question is, they are interested in maybe going in and speaking with the superintendent or school business official. They're a little bit shy of doing that. And how do they go about making that appointment? And is it okay to do that?
Amy and Greg, weigh in, and then I'll add a couple thoughts as well. How did you approach that?
So I'm in a smaller district. We're only about 3,400 residents, so it's really easy for me just to walk into the school and talk to the superintendent or the business secretary before I ran. The only caution I would say, I wouldn't be hesitant of that. I mean, at the end of the day, the superintendent works for the board, so you may be their boss soon. So there's gonna be an additive incentive for them to at least establish a good relationship with you from the start. And they're more than willing to give that information, because like I mentioned earlier, the more information, especially about school finance, that the community understands, the easier it is for all kinds of things. Because we deal with a lot of those, like Harry's mentioned, why are you spending money on this when we had to, lay off a teacher? And if they can spread that information, they're more than happy to do it. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I don't think I've run into a superintendent yet who wouldn't jump at the chance if a candidate asked and wanted to learn more, that they would be more than willing. Or if the school business manager is better positioned, maybe one or both of them might offer to meet. In some districts, superintendent or business official just open up some times and offer them up to any of the candidates who want to come in. So there are multiple ways to gather that info, but I would ask. Amy, any tips or insights you'd share about that?
I would just say it can be a little intimidating to think about, calling the superintendent of schools, but every superintendent is about building relationships. And if they can build a relationship with a potential new board member, at the very least, they're building a relationship with another community member that can help spread understanding of how the district's finances work. So look at it as a chance to communicate, get to know each other, and share some understanding.
Very helpful, thanks. Ooh, it's time for another poll.
All right. Okay, here we go, Harry. And you've got the question on the screen for everyone, but you should see it now also if you can see the poll.
So we're just asking you to reflect on your current knowledge of what the enrollment trends are in your district.
And it's okay wherever you're at on that continuum is
Right,
fine.
absolutely. We'll give us a few more seconds.
Giving people a little bit more time to, so that enrollment, I've heard another way that Patty Schrader says the money follows the child. Is another way
Absolutely.
to say that.
That's right. Head count matters.
Yeah.
It really, really does. That's for sure.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and close the poll.
And we'll see what people say. Here
And
we go.
we have a mixture that it ranges from, I have a good understanding, which was about a quarter of our participants today. About half of them picked the middle area. I have some understanding, and then about a quarter said I have little understanding of the enrollment trends, which we would expect the full array. And the good news is you have an additional area as a candidate to learn more about. So, all right, we'll close that poll. Here's another one. One of those interesting areas that board members identify is the time commitment. And almost, again, every board member we talk with or hear from after their first 6 months on the boards, sometimes far less time than that, will say, wow, the board work was much more than most people realized and that I realized. So it's well beyond 1 or 2 meetings per month. There are committees and other obligations, and Amy and Greg will share a little bit about that. And then there is just the preparation for the meeting. And many board meetings have multiple pages of background information for board members to read before they ever come to the board table for the first meeting. So big time commitments here. It's, again, much more than what meets the eye. And we would ask, Greg, would you share your experiences with time commitments on serving on the local board?
Sure. Besides finances, this is the other part that I think I misjudged when I ran, which it was fine, but I probably spend on average 10 to 15 hours a week working on school board items. The biggest catch you're going to run into is all of the kind of unplanned, right? So we have a regular meeting once a month, but there's so many other things that slip in there, right? So we had a superintendent retire last year. The process to hire a new superintendent was like 80 hours in itself. We had Saturday meetings, 5-hour, late night meetings with recruiters and whatnot. Those things you don't think about. Tomorrow morning, we welcome all new staff back to the district, and the board's typically invited to come speak and meet the new staff. Those sorts of things kind of crop up. Right now, we're in the middle of a facilities project that's going to go out for a bond vote in September. So last week, I had a meeting every night. Meeting with community members, meeting with community clubs, a regular board meeting, those things. So you just kind of underestimate all the additional work, SIAC meetings or school improvement advisory committee meetings. You miss all those things that aren't just the regular monthly board meeting, but they're out there, and it can be a pretty big time commitment. That said, right, everybody on the board, my fellow board mates, we all have other jobs, so we all understand that, sometimes we have to pick up the slack for each other. So I travel a little bit for work. They understand that, but there's still a pretty good time commitment involved.
I think some helpful examples you shared, Greg, because it isn't just the formal meetings. It's related to board work and community board connection, those sort of things. So yeah, real helpful. Amy, how about you? Your thoughts about the time commitments and expectations of a board member?
Yeah, again, I underestimated it as well, but I don't want that to scare people off because it is so rewarding. The time you spend in those unplanned meetings, interacting with staff, like at the welcome back breakfast, being on the school improvement advisory committee, being on, superintendent search. All of those things help you develop a better understanding of the district, helps you develop relationships with board members and staff members. Also, besides that, there's going to school activities. You want to try to be visible at as many school activities as you can. And then you also want to make time for your own board learning, your own development. You're overseeing an education institution, so you have a responsibility to increase your education as well so that you can make the best informed decisions. So there's lots of learning events that you can go to, from webinars like this one, to the convention, which we'll talk about, to regional workshops. There's just a lot of opportunities for you to improve your skills and your understanding as a board member.
When you were sharing, Amy, one of my favorite times of the year is after new board members are elected, and they're early on learning opportunities, and we'll ask veteran board members to weigh in on why did they run for the board and what do they find most satisfying. And they're the very kinds of things you describe, Amy, the notion of giving back to the community, having the potential to make a difference for kids, and they smile on their face as they share those things. So I echo your comments. We're not trying to scare candidates off, but also trying to help put information out ahead of time so you're not caught off guard or by surprise. So, all right, Lou, I think it's time for another poll. And let's hear from our participants about what they have done or plan to do to learn more about the time commitments and what's really involved in board work. So go ahead and complete the poll, please.
Yep, people are starting to weigh in. And while our members some of our people attending may be members, but while our attendees are voting, the question came in that I can answer real quickly. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our website within 48 hours, as will be the other 3 webinars for board candidates that are coming up soon.
Great, and feel free to, as if others in your district express interest in the board, to steer them toward this webinar for information, or your superintendent or business official may choose to hold a local informational session for candidates, and you're welcome to borrow and stream portions of this webinar, anything that will help get the word out.
So Harry, I'm hearing from some of our attendees that I made a mistake when I developed the poll. They can only select one answer. So sorry about that. See, it's not just you, Harry.
Good. No.
So this might just show the first one that they answered, and people may have selected for them.
Got it.
Or done for them.
Got it. I would guess that if they were able to access all that, there would be many of these that were chosen. So we'll close that poll. It's intended as just a memory jog for you. Moving toward our last couple tips or areas here. And again, we'll have time for any additional questions that pop in. So next tip, learning about the school district, and with an emphasis on goals, priorities, the big initiatives, the big picture kind of district information as a candidate. For example, and many of these are available on the district website. You may already have been able to access these, but what we call guiding documents. What is the vision? What's the mission? What are the key goals? What direction is your school district headed? And the more you can learn about those big picture directional areas, the better. What are key initiatives? Teaching and learning initiatives, programs. If your district is right in the middle of growing a career and technical area program or a foreign language program, it's good to know about that as a candidate, as well as what are the big picture facilities kinds of improvements that are underway or being talked about for the future. And then the last area is just any big picture info around the state of the district. You know, what's our big picture in staffing trends? Are we growing staffing? As a stayed flat? Are there some areas, maybe in enrollment and staffing is growing in the elementary, but it's shrinking at the secondary, or vice versa? Boundaries. More than once, a candidate will say, I didn't realize I live in county or district community X, but I'm in school district Y. and the boundaries don't exactly match up. So again, better understanding the boundaries of your district and what seat and what area you are running for. Insights from Greg and then Amy. What helped you learn important information about your school district?
Sure. So the kind of the first thing I did when I came on the board, there were two board members retiring. I reached out to both of them and got good information. One of them was on the school board for 10 plus years, had a really strong finance background, so he was able to give me a lot of that finance information that I didn't have, or at least filled me in. I looked at prior board minutes. I attended a few board meetings beforehand. That's probably one that you can't stress enough. We don't get a big attendance at our board meetings. It's not the most happening thing in town. So get out and watch those. All ours are recorded, so you can. If you're bored and you've watched everything on Netflix, you can certainly watch some school board meetings. They can be great fun, I'm sure. The advice I kind of have is, and it goes back to the promises piece. It's you kind of think about previous board work that was done, and you can get that information. So if you have a concern about something that the board is planning to do in the future or is currently in action, those board members coming off, the superintendent, they can give you kind of some of that backstory, so at least you understand why that decision was made. And the same thing with educational standards or changes on the education side of things. So if the district decides that they want to change reading programs or whatnot so that third grade reading improves, if you go in and change that after the second year, they kind of have to start over, because those things take multiple years to really see the value, right? If you're going to change the scores of reading in third grade, it's going to take a kindergartner to get to third grade before you have the best understanding of what that did. So you have to think about those things ahead of time, and getting all that information from past board members, whatnot, is really valuable.
Great. And Amy, what was helpful to you in learning information about your district and the work of the board?
Well, speaking to the superintendent is a great way just to get their take on, what are those big initiatives in our district, the biggest challenges, the biggest successes and strengths of our district. Getting an idea of what went into those decisions, as Greg talked about. You have to remember that those initiatives, the train has left the station, and you don't want to derail the train once it's already left. So, understanding why those decisions were made, and then how you're going to hold the system accountable to make sure, if it's a new curriculum, a new reading curriculum, what supports and assessments do you have in place to make sure that it's doing what you wanted it to do? I can't stress enough attending board meetings. You might have the opportunity to go to the August board meeting, for sure September and October. It really helps you to understand how the board operates, the pace of meetings, how decisions are made at the table, even parliamentary procedure. If you're not familiar with that, you get to see how that works a few times before you're actually seated at the board. So,
yes, and I could see it. It will also help clarify what's the work of the board secretary or business official look like as it relates to the board. What's the superintendent's role in school board meetings? All helpful sources of information. Yeah. Let's move to the next poll, and I'm going to reframe the question a twitch. So when Luann launches this, rather than what you've done, I'm going to ask you to skim these 6 items and pick one that you think would be a next helpful step for you if there's one of these that you haven't done already. What would be a next step for you to learn more about the board?
And I did edit this one. So
we can't. Well, never. Be
so
quiet, Harry. Pick
no.
all that you've done to learn more about the work of the board. Thank you. Good. Thanks, Lou. This has been fixed. Pick all you want. If this doesn't work, I'm off the hook.
Okay, so some folks are starting to vote. Okay, hopefully we can pick one.
Great. And please let us know if you're bumping into issues there. So.
But good work on your feet, Harry.
ad lib
It's a
there,
fine
sure.
mistake.
No problem. I'll
Okay.
let this go for another few seconds.
A nice array of options.
Do. And participants, you have been Johnny on the spot here for opening the poll up, and we'll welcome your feedback when it's done. We've integrated the polls for a couple purposes, for engagement as well as just some thoughts, things to think about doing. So we'd love to hear from you on how helpful were the polls, or were they distracting, and whatever other insights you have. Okay, let's go ahead and close it out, Luann.
Okay. So now here are the results here. I'll let you interpret for.
Yeah, it's encouraging to see that a great majority of you, over 80%, have attended a school board meeting. You've talked already with one or more board members, and you've reviewed at least a couple of school board agendas or materials. So good for you guys. Should have known this was going to be the advanced group, shouldn't we? And I mean that sincerely. That's cool. About a third of you have met with the superintendent or board secretary. And you recall earlier, we encourage you to they'll be willing and glad to have the opportunity to see you, meet with you, provide info. And probably the next most frequent one is the explore the district's website or ISB's website, which, by the way, for candidates, once or if you're elected, the whole website becomes accessible to you. Right now, the elections page section is your primary entry point. So thank you. With that, let's look at our last area, and then we'll have some time for some questions and some info about upcoming learning opportunities. So filing as a candidate. On September 10th, Tuesday, our second webinar will be available, and that will also be recorded. It will go much deeper into this area, but the highlights are 6 days from now is the first date that candidates can file their nomination papers and their affidavit with the board school secretary, board secretary. And then there's about a 3+ week window. So September 19th is the last day to file those nomination papers and the signed affidavit. And places you can learn more are not only our website or office, but the Secretary of State's office, the Iowa Campaign Ethics and Disclosure Board websites, and again, next week's webinar, which will be recorded. We look forward to being able to serve you and provide information through those methods. Amy, and then Greg, would you share any insights or things you've thought of that are important for candidates to keep in mind when either filing or running for the board?
Yeah, so first of all, you definitely want to go into the board secretary. Sometimes that's the same person as the business manager, sometimes it's not. But the board secretary will have all the information you need for, where you get your signatures, how many signatures you need, all of that stuff. So they'll be a great resource for that. You'll also want to be prepared to answer questions about the district and about why you're running for the school board. You'll inevitably be contacted by the newspaper, radio stations. They'll want to know, oh, you're a candidate, why are you running for the board? What do you see as needs for the district? What are the strengths of the district? And so if you've done that background work and met with the superintendent, and you've gone to board meetings, you'll have a much better feel for that.
Great. Greg, what would you share in terms of insights for filing or running?
Yeah, a lot of what Amy mentioned, I would say, make sure you kind of have your elevator pitch when you go talk to people, to have them sign your filing. You're going to get a lot of questions. You're going to learn a lot of things while you do it, so you can refine that as you go. Get as many signatures as you can. I think the rule is 10% or 50, whichever's lower. But keep in mind, signatures can get thrown out if they're illegible, or if it's just kind of you're not sure they live in the district, or maybe you've got somebody that doesn't live in the district. So just get as many as you can. The biggest use for that is that you can get to meet more people. I think a lot of times we don't get out and talk. We maybe stick in our little circle of people that know us, since it's such a kind of low number. The more people you get out and talk to, the more information you can get from them, because they're more than willing to share their insights about the school district. And then the last thing, Amy mentioned news media for sure. We also had a community forum here in West Branch that we had to get up and answer questions on, so kind of be prepared for that.
You might need to switch your setting on your microphone, Greg, getting a little bit of static on that one. Thank you. So, Luann, would you guide us through before we formally allocate a few minutes for any remaining questions, but upcoming learning opportunities, please?
Absolutely. And I'll also say that we have supports here at ISD. Give us a call if we can help guide you in any direction. If you have any questions, our communication director, Tammy, takes those calls and can help you as well. She's awesome at that. So as many of you know who are attending today's webinar or watching the recorded webinar, we have 3 more in our series of Tuesday Talks with ISB webinars for board candidates. We're really excited about this. The first time we've really done this effort, but it's really to provide a lot of essential information to help you understand what board service is all about if you choose to run. And then once you make that commitment, if you choose to, some additional information. So the following, this is the foundational piece for everyone, but the next 3 are going deeper into some of the topics that we're talking about.
And I personally am especially excited for the one on the 10th. That's a new offering. And whether you're a candidate in a community where there are full-blown active campaigning, yard signs, all those sort of things, or you may be in a community where it doesn't get that amount of publicity, there are still some key learnings and things. What can I communicate with staff, and what kind of format, what's on and off limits legally, just a lot of tips. And so we'd encourage you to check those out. And then Luann, we'd be remiss if we didn't
So I paid Harry $5 to put the slide in. So please, folks, this is really important. Take out your calendars now and mark November 20th and 21st on your calendar. Save that time if you can. This is our annual convention that we put on every year for board members and superintendents and staff. So we're really super excited about this year's lineup. This is an essential time for board members to come, network with peers, and learn together. And on Wednesday, November 20th, we have a special pre-convention workshop, Harry, Thriving in Your First 90 Days.
You bet, and we're offering that session both in the morning and the afternoon. It's a 2.5-hour session aimed heavily at newly elected board members, but there will likely be veteran board members and superintendents attending, and it's a really good chance to take a bath in those kinds of things that are going to be a great support to new board members in those first 2, 3, 4 months in that position.
What's not on our slide, we also, when you were talking about those school finance learnings, we have School Finance 101, which is another way to indoctrinate yourself into school finance. It was way much deeper than one slide that we talked about today, but that could be in addition to attending the Thriving in Your First 90 Days.
Those are offered again morning and afternoon on Wednesday the 20th.
And then Thursday, November 21st is our convention day, where we continue our day of learning with our speakers. We have Sir Ken Robinson coming this year. We have over 30 great education sessions where we're focusing on trends and issues in education. And we do have several education sessions earmarked for newly elected candidates. Talk to your board secretary now if you're interested in attending, if you win, because he or she can then note that and get you registered if you win.
And Amy or Greg, any comments either of you would want to share about convention, and then we'll transition to questions.
I would say it's a great event. You can kind of learn a lot of things, especially, when I was on the board, say I would have been seated in September, so it was like 2 months later. There's probably a lot of benefit now for being on the board for like a couple of weeks before you get to go learn all those things. You mentioned the finance workshops. My first year, I was actually selected as a delegate because I'm kind of a politics wonk. But then I did the Finance 201, which looks specifically at the numbers for your district and explains them to you. It was way over my head, but I learned a lot. So think about those things. But the rest of the content was great, especially for people who aren't normally in education ahead of time. You'll learn quite a bit.
Great. And Amy, any comments you'd want to add?
Great time. The convention is a great time not only to learn, but also to connect with and talk with other board members, vendors. There's a lot of vendors there for different services that they can provide to school districts. You just Oh, it's just amazing. It's nonstop, and you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, but it's awesome.
And you will be drinking from a fire hose, but it'll be fun drinking. So great. Luann, have there been any additional questions that have come in, or we'll lean on you for a wrap up?
No, not yet, but we'll watch and see as we wrap up and provide a little bit more details. If anybody does submit a question, then we'll go ahead and field it now. And in the meantime, people can still reach out if they have additional questions.
Sounds great.
But on behalf of ISB, thank you all for taking time to learn together with us. We are here to help and just a phone call away. I mean, really, the fact that we have people that are watching this webinar as candidates or considering candidacy really talks about their commitment to learning already and how important that is as board members to continue that commitment. So thank you. This webinar was recorded, and as I mentioned before, will be posted on our website for viewing within 48 hours. And you will receive a follow-up email with a link to a survey tomorrow. Please take time to respond to that survey. We really do look at that data and information, and it helps inform our future events. I'm getting a question, so before we say goodbye, let me ask the question.
Sure.
How public, oh, good question. How public is the list of potential candidates that have picked up a packet from the superintendent's office? People know who else is running. Do you know?
That's a beauty.
So my take on that is, in a small district, it's probably very public because typically the superintendent's office knows everyone. But I think officially they don't really care until you turn it back in with signatures, at least in our district. That's when it hit the paper. As soon as I turned my papers back in, fully signed, and they were approved, then it was in the paper like that next week.
That was going to be similar to my comment. Amy, anything else you'd add about that?
Nope, I've had the same experience. Once you turn in your signatures and everything, then it becomes public. I suppose technically it is public if you take out papers, but I've never seen where that list was released.
And there is that short window in there, I believe, between the 19th, the closing date, and I think it's September 24th, that there is that window that if circumstances would come up and a person needed to withdraw, there's that 5-day window they can do that.
Follow-up question is, can the person call and ask for a list? I'm curious about who may be running.
I'm not sure. That's one we'll have to forward that question to for the next webinar, or if you include that in your feedback to Luann, the specific individual, we can look to get that information to you.
I can respond to
Perfect.
everyone if they want to know. I can send an email
Perfect. I think a parting thought I had is thank you for your time. I mean, here, you are folks who are considering running for the board, have decided to run for the board, or just listening to learn. And your involvement today says a lot about how conscientious you are and that you are actively seeking information. And we just tip our hat to you and say, good for you. And we appreciate your diligence here and your willingness to learn. And Amy and Craig, thank you so much for participating. Candidates 2 years ago, Greg was in your shoes. And a few years longer than that ago, Amy was in your shoes. So thanks, guys, for your help today, too. And with that.
And that's a wrap.
And yeah, we're ahead of schedule by a minute and a half.
Take care, everyone. Just give us a call if we can help. And good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.